US President Trump's big, beautiful tax bill has passed the House on 22nd of May, and now is on its way to the Senate with the goal to become law by 4th of July. The main focus of this bill is to provide tax relief for American working families and small businesses. But you might be thinking, wait a second, I'm not American, I don't live there, I don't even hold any US assets. Why does it matter to me? You might not hold any US investments, but your superannuation fund probably has. Most of the big Australian super funds invest in US companies. In fact, according to research from Monash University, those US investments have been a major reason why our super funds have performed so strongly over the past 10 years. So when US tax rules change, it's not just something that affects Wall Street. It could ripple all the way over here into your retirement account. In this video, we'll take a closer look at one specific part of Trump's tax bill that could have a knock-on effect on Australian super funds. We'll break down how that works, what it could mean for your future balance, and what we can do to stay informed. Alright, so let's get into what this tax bill actually says and why it could mess with your super fund. The bill is packed with the usual legal and tax stuff, but tucked away on page 40 is something called Section 11-2029, Enforcement of Remedies Against Unfair Foreign Taxes. This provision provides a response to certain unfair taxes, which include both discriminatory and extraterritorial taxes imposed on US persons or certain foreign entities owned by US persons by a foreign government. The provision responds to unfair taxes by increasing the rate of tax generally applicable to certain taxpayers connected to the foreign jurisdiction. Affected taxpayers generally include the foreign government, resident individuals, resident corporations, resident foreign private foundations, and entities owned by such persons. The increase applied to certain income, withholding, and excise taxes imposed on non-residents. The rate of tax imposed increases from the rates otherwise applicable under current law in 5% increments for each year the unfair tax is imposed, until either the unfair tax is removed or the tax reaches a maximum amount equal to the relevant statutory rate plus 20%. That might sound like bureaucratic fluff, but here's what it really means. The bill proposes a 5% annual increase on the existing US withholding tax, stacking each year until it hits a cap of 20%. We'll get into details on the tax rates in a sec, but for now, you're probably curious about what are the unfair taxes Trump and his administration think. What was the trigger of this particular section to be included in
one big beautiful bill?
We'll have to go back to 2018. On the 6th of December 2018, France decided that big tech companies, especially US giants like Google, Apple, Meta, and Amazon, shouldn't be able to dodge taxes just because they don't have physical offices in France.
We know that for years you've been pushing for this digital tax. It's something that you've made your battle horse to some extent. How confident are you that we get a full deal by the end of the week?
I'm very confident.
So they introduced a 3% tax on revenue those companies earned in the country. In its first year, the tax raised roughly 400 million euros for the French treasury. In 2020, it brought in about 375 million euro. The UK followed with a similar idea, applying a 2% tax on digital revenue made by large companies operating in their market. Other countries like Italy, Spain, India, Canada, and Turkey rolled out similar taxes too. These are called digital services tax, or DSTs. The US government was not happy about them, obviously.
The Trump administration has threatened to impose tariffs as high as 100% on a range of French goods.
Sparkling wine is on the list. You see cheeses, you see makeup, you see handbags.
France put on a tax on our companies. Wrong.
Now, while Australia didn't create a separate digital tax like France, it made its own move in 2017 by expanding the regular 10% GST to cover digital services and low-value goods brought from overseas. And this 10% levy functions much like a DST, but as part of Australia's broader consumption tax system. That raised about 728 million Aussie dollars over the first 3 years, and from the US point of view, it still smelled like a digital tax, just dressed up as a GST rule. Fast forward to 2021, and more than 135 countries, including Australia, joined a global tax reform plan under the OECD and G20. This agreement had two pillars. Pillar 1, shift more taxing rights to countries where companies make their sales, even if they don't have offices there. Pillar 2, introduce a minimum 15% tax on large multinational companies, no matter where they are based. This includes a rule called the under-tax profits rule. UTPR, which lets countries collect extra tax if a company isn't paying at least 15% somewhere else. Trump's team, however, saw this as another way of targeting US companies. On his first day back in office, he signed an executive order rejecting the OECD's plan altogether. He told the US Treasury to look for ways to push back, including the very tax hike outlined in Section 11/2029. If the US labels Australia's tax system as unfair, whether it's our digital GST rules or the global tax framework we agreed to under the OECD, then Aussie super funds with money in the US could face higher withholding taxes. By 2024, Australia's superannuation system hit $4.1 trillion, which is 2.3 times of its GDP in the same year. Among the $4.1 trillion super, it's estimated around $400 billion invested in the US assets in total. Following the election of Trump in November last year, many big super funds have increased their US tech holdings as they are bullish on the US market, and the US tech would be a great representative of that. To be fair, you and me would agree with that view. In fact, as we started 2025, the so-called Magnificent 7 tech stocks were major parts of portfolios at funds like UniSuper and Australian Super, which you or I might be part of. So if Trump's tax bill becomes law and Australia ends up on that unfair tax list, what would happen to our retirement savings? Right now, here's how the US taxes non-US residents like us. Dividends from US companies are taxed at 15% thanks to a tax treaty between Australia and the US. And capital gains when you sell a stock for more than you paid are not taxed by the US unless it's real estate. So for Aussie investors and super funds, US tax is basically just 15% on dividends and 0% on capital gains. You filled out a form WA-BAN every 3 years, and that's it. If the bill passes and Australia is seen as having unfair tax rules, the US would add a 5% penalty to the usual tax rate every year for up to 4 years, maxing out at 20% on top of the normal tax. Here's what that looks like. Let's say John has $100,000 in UniSuper growth option. About 20% of that is in US stock, and they return 2% dividends per year. Right now, the 15% US tax means $400 in dividends, $60 tax withheld, $340 lands in his super. If the bill passes, here's what John sees over time. This might not seem like much now, but over 35 years, that $80 per year tax drag could cut his super by over $4,000, even with modest assumptions. Let's say UniSuper decides to sell 2,000 of US stocks to hit his new allocation target, and these stocks have grown 10%. So the capital gain is $182. Currently, there's no US tax on capital gains, but under Trump's bill, this is what happens. Even small portfolio tweaks could quietly cost more. If you have investment outside of super, the same withholding rates could apply to your brokerage account as well. ETFs like IVV, SPY, BTS could all be affected. From the super fund's point of view, they could respond in a few ways, such as sell US holdings before the bill becomes law, but these could spook the market, or shift allocation away from US stocks. That would hurt long-term growth. Or wait and see, which seems to be the current approach. The Financial Services Council is urging the Australian government to speak with the US about protecting our retirement funds. In fact, a group of large super funds recently visited Wall Street and Washington, pointing out that Aussie funds hold $400 billion in US assets, with plans to grow that to $1 trillion by 2032. Mary Dillahunty from the Superannuation Association said, funds are watching closely but don't need to act just yet. As an individual investor, here's what I'm thinking and what you might consider too. I would maximize my foreign income tax offset and file them properly. Say I have $50,000 invested in IVV outside of super, which has been held more than 12 months. In the first year after Trump's tax bill passes, I received dividends of $1,000. I also sold $5,000 of IVV, and the capital gain from this sale is $650. As I had held IVV for more than 12 months, I could get 50% discount before it's added to my assessable income of $1,325. If I'm on 37% marginal tax rate, before the foreign income offset, I would need to pay $490.25 in tax. Because I filed the foreign income tax thoroughly, in the end, I could get $232.50 in the foreign income tax offset. As you can see, it's very easy to miss something during the process if you calculate the tax manually yourself, even with one holding. Imagine trying to keep track of this across 10 ETFs. All of these can be done by a portfolio management tool, which could save you time and money. If you want to try the one that I use myself, feel free to use the link and get 25% off annual subscription. So before I change my investing strategy, I would keep detailed records of gross dividends, withholding amounts from my AMA tax statements, as I'll need these to get full credits. If you're staying invested in the US, think about where you hold these assets. Super still offers lower tax rates than your personal marginal rate, but trusts or companies might work better for some people. Get advice if you are not sure. You can also reduce annual tax drag by focusing more on growth stocks over dividend-heavy ones. But remember, reinvesting your dividends doesn't change the withholding tax, but it helps compound your investments. If this tax change drags on, it may make sense to rebalance towards local markets, Asia or Europe. At the same time, if the US market dips from outflows, that could be a buying opportunity as well. It's all about balance. Complex rules can have knock-on effect on trust companies or self-managed super funds. If you're not sure or you want to have a sounding board, talk to your financial planner and ask them to run scenario models to show all the possible impacts based on your situation so you can be well prepared. We're really living in an era that a lot of things are happening, from AI breaking through to political influence on our retirement fund. One day we might hear Australian government might push the unrealized capital gain tax exceeding 3 million on super. Another day, even US tax bill can affect Australians' retirement funds. It's just wild. Our super is meant to be steady, long-term, and boring in the best way, but it doesn't mean that we can afford to ignore the moving pieces that shape it. Staying informed without getting overwhelmed is probably one of the best things that we can do for our future selves. So if you made it this far, thanks for watching. If this helped you see things more clearly, share it with someone who might be impacted too.